Honestly, I don't know why they even send us the dishwashers from logistics. Ma'am, could you give me a coffee? Black. 2 sugars, the crowd of junior officers and data analysts, tense and frayed from the escalating global crisis, let out a collective, nervous titter of laughter. It was a pressure valve release, a moment of cruel levity in the suffocating atmosphere of the Global Threat Assessment Center, the GTAC. They laughed because Major Kalen Thorne expected them to. He stood there, a peacock in a room of pigeons, his tailored Class A uniform so crisp it seemed to have been forged rather than stitched, a constellation of perfectly polished metals on his chest reflecting the cold, blue light of the holographic displays. He was the watch commander, the self-appointed king of this digital castle, and his word was law. The woman he addressed did not react. She stood near a secondary data stream terminal, a ghost in a simple gray pantsuit that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, revealing a face that was neither young nor old, a face that held the impassive calm of ancient stone. She looked less like a part of this high-stakes military nerve center and more like an archivist who had wandered in from a dusty library, a forgotten administrative assistant, a dishwasher from the mess hall. Her hands, resting on the edge of the console, were still, her posture one of quiet observation. She offered no retort, no flicker of anger, no sign that she had even registered the insult. There was only a slight, almost imperceptible dip of her head, an acknowledgement that sound had been made in her direction. But when the 4-star general commanding the entire Joint Task Force saw her stance on his private command feed, a flicker of something ancient and deep, recognition, crossed his face. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, ignoring the cacophony of alerts to focus on the quiet woman in gray. He knew that stance. He had seen it once before, in the smoldering ruins of a server farm after a silent war had been won. If you believe true strength needs no announcement, type competence is quiet below. Major Thorne smirked, basking in the brief ripple of subservient amusement. He turned his attention back to the main hollow table, a swirling vortex of red icons and alarming threat vectors that represented a world teetering on the brink. "All right, people, let's get our heads in the game," he announced, his voice booming with a manufactured confidence that barely concealed the tremor of panic just beneath the surface. "Intel says this is a coordinated ghost probe. Sophisticated, but nothing we haven't handled before. I want predictive analytics on all drone swarm signatures, and give me a direct line to Cyber Command. I want to know how their firewalls were breached." He moved around the command floor with the practiced swagger of a man who believed his own hype, pointing, issuing orders, his every gesture a performance for the benefit of his subordinates, and he assumed, for the senior leadership watching remotely. He was a man playing the part of a commander, mistaking volume for authority and arrogance for competence. The woman in gray, the target of his casual cruelty, remained a fixed point of stillness in the swirling chaos. Her focus was absolute, her gaze locked onto a small, unassuming data stream that most of the analysts had dismissed as background noise, telemetry data from a network of older, supposedly obsolete weather satellites. While Thorne and his team were chasing the loud, dramatic explosions on the main screen, the ghost fleet of autonomous drones appearing off the coast of a key ally, the jamming signals crippling their naval communications, she was watching the subtle ripples, the faint digital echoes that preceded each event. She saw the pattern not in the attack itself, but in the silence between the attacks. It was a rhythm, a cadence, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. Her presence on the floor was an anomaly nobody had bothered to question. She had arrived that morning with a simple travel order citing logistical systems oversight, a vague and unimpressive directive that had immediately relegated her to the status of a bureaucratic functionary in Thorne's mind. He had seen her unassuming attire, her lack of rank insignia, her quiet demeanor, and he had made an assumption. It was the gravest mistake of his career, a miscalculation of such epic proportions that it would be studied in war colleges for decades to come. He sought a dishwasher. The universe was about to show him a god of the machine. The air in the GTEC grew thick with a metallic taste of fear as the situation deteriorated. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just a probe. It was adapting, learning, countering every move Thorne's team made. His commands grew louder, more frantic, his confidence fraying into raw, naked anger. He was losing control, and through it all, the woman in gray simply watched, her calm a silent, damning indictment of the chaos that surrounded her. She was not waiting for permission. She was waiting for the perfect moment to act. The moment arrived not with a bang, but with a sudden, chilling silence. The main holographic display, which had been a chaotic canvas of enemy movements and frantic friendly responses, flickered and died. One by one, the secondary monitors blinked into blackness, their screens reflecting the horrified faces of the analysts staring into the void. The data streams flatlined. The encrypted communication lines went dead. The GTAC, the technological heart of the coalition's defense, was blind, deaf, and dumb. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was a dead-stick landing in the middle of a war zone, a complete and total systems failure. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. "Report," Thorne bellowed, his voice cracking, the carefully constructed facade of his authority shattering into 1,000 pieces. "What is going on? Somebody get me a status report now." His words echoed in the cavernous room, met only by the frantic, useless clatter of keyboards and the terrified whispers of his team. They were adrift in an ocean of digital silence, and the sharks were circling. It was in this precise moment of total system collapse that the quiet woman in gray finally moved. She did not rush. She did not panic. Her movements were fluid, economical, and imbued with a certainty that seemed alien in the panicked atmosphere. She pushed away from the secondary console and walked, with a calm and measured pace, towards a dormant, hardened terminal in the far corner of the room. It was an old piece of hardware, disconnected from the main network, a relic from a previous generation of technology that was kept only for deep system diagnostics. A young lieutenant, seeing her approach the quarantine station, moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, that terminal is off limits. It's a legacy system." The woman didn't break her stride. She simply looked at the young man, her eyes clear and direct, and said nothing. Her silence was more commanding than any order Thorne had shouted. The lieutenant froze, then stepped aside, an unspoken question hanging in the air. She sat down at the terminal. The screen was dark, the machine cold. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a single, suspended moment, the way a concert pianist might pause before a breathtaking sonata. And then they moved. Her fingers did not type, they danced. They flew across the keys with a speed and precision that defied belief, a blur of practiced, methodical motion. It was not the clumsy pecking of an administrator, but the seamless, intuitive flow of a master craftsman who was one with her tools. On the dark screen, lines of emerald green code began to cascade downwards, a waterfall of pure data in a language no one else in the room could comprehend. She wasn't trying to reboot the system. She was bypassing it entirely. She was diving deep into the machine's core, into the digital bedrock upon which the entire GTAC was built. While Thorne Cyber Command specialists had been fighting the enemy on the surface, trying to patch firewalls and counter denial of service attacks, she was going after the source. She ignored the Ghost Fleet. She ignored the communications jamming. She was hunting the puppeteer, not the puppets. The code streaming down her screen was a thing of terrifying beauty. It was elegant, brutal, and impossibly efficient. She was forcing open backdoors that no one knew existed, exploiting vulnerabilities that were buried in the system's own architecture. To the few analysts who could even begin to grasp what she was doing, it was like watching someone dismantle a skyscraper from the inside out and then rebuild it in a new, stronger form, all in a matter of seconds. The air crackled with a strange energy. The oppressive silence was replaced by the soft, rhythmic click of the keyboard, a sound that was at once hypnotic and profoundly unnerving. Thorne, his face pale with a mixture of fear and dawning disbelief, could only stare, his own inadequacy laid bare for all to see. He had been fighting a fire with a squirt gun, and this woman had just summoned a tidal wave. In less than 90 seconds, she found it. A single, unique signature buried deep within the malicious code. A recursive algorithm that was the attacker's calling card. But it was more than that. It was familiar. She paused for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, not nostalgia, but a cold, hard recognition in her eyes. She knew this code. She had written its predecessor a decade ago. And she knew the fatal flaw she had deliberately built into it. A hidden kill switch, a ghost key for a door no one else knew was there. With a final, decisive series of keystrokes, she turned the key. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The main holographic display, along with every other screen in the GTAC, roared back to life with a blinding flash of white light. The chaos of red icons was gone. The ghost fleet had vanished from the map as if it had never existed. The jamming signals were silent. The communications channels were crystal clear. But the screen was not empty. In the center of the vast, silent map, in the heart of a hostile, non-extradition territory, a single red dot pulsed with a steady, damning rhythm. It was the physical location of the enemy's command and control server. She hadn't just defended against their attack. She had used their own weapon as a targeting beacon, turning their sophisticated assault into a homing missile that pointed directly back at their heart. She had checkmated them in a game they didn't even know she was playing. In the wake of the sudden restoration, a new kind of silence fell upon the GTAC. It was not the silence of dead systems, but the deafening, absolute silence of pure, unadulterated awe. 200 highly trained professionals stood frozen, their mouths agape, their minds struggling to process the miracle they had just witnessed. Major Kalen Thorne stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of slack-jawed incomprehension. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. That's not possible." The woman in gray slowly rose from the legacy terminal, her work done. She looked at the main screen, at the single pulsing red dot, with a cool, dispassionate satisfaction, then turned her calm gaze back towards a stunned watch commander. The heavy blast doors at the rear of the GTAC hissed open, cutting through the stunned silence. General Marcus Vance, the overall commander of the Joint Base, strode onto the command floor. He was a man carved from granite and experience, his presence radiating an authority that was earned, not claimed. He didn't look at the restored screens or the pulsing red that had just won them the day. He didn't look at the shell-shocked Major Thorne. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, went straight to the quiet woman in gray who was now standing calmly by the legacy terminal. He walked directly to her, his polished boots echoing on the polished floor, each step a hammer blow against the brittle silence. The entire room held its breath, watching the two figures, the highest-ranking officer on the base and the anonymous woman who had just performed a digital miracle. Vance stopped a respectful distance from her. He surveyed the scene, the dumbstruck faces of the crew, the utter humiliation etched on Thorne's features, and the quiet, unassuming posture of the woman who had single-handedly averted a global catastrophe. A long, unreadable moment passed between them. He knew. Of course, he knew. He turned his gaze from her to the assembled personnel, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room a blade of pure command. "For the last 6 hours," he began, "you have been engaged with a Tier 1 offensive cyber weapon, a system we codenamed Cerberus. It was designed to cripple our entire strategic command infrastructure in under 5 minutes. It almost succeeded." He paused, letting the weight of their failure settle upon them. "Our best cyber warfare teams were locked out. Our most advanced defensive AIs were bypassed. We were, for all intents and purposes, defeated." He then turned his head slowly, deliberately, until his gaze fell upon the pale, trembling Major Thorne. "Major, you and your team were chasing ghosts. You were fighting the symptoms while the disease was killing the patient. You were loud. You were frantic. And you were ineffective." The words were not shouted, but delivered with a cold, surgical precision that was far more devastating. General Vance then turned his full attention back to the woman in gray, and his entire demeanor shifted. The hardness in his eyes softened into something else entirely, a deep, profound, and almost reverent respect. "A decade ago," he said, his voice taking on the quality of a historian recounting a sacred myth, "we fought a silent war in the shadows of the digital world. A war we were losing. Our networks were compromised, our intelligence was being stolen, our defenses were crumbling. Then a new weapon was deployed. Not a piece of hardware, but a philosophy. A new form of defensive and offensive protocol that didn't just fight back, it thought. It adapted. It learned. It was called Project Chimera." A few of the older analysts in the room stirred, their eyes widening. Project Chimera was a legend, a ghost story whispered about in secure server rooms, a mythical program credited with saving the entire Western intelligence apparatus from collapse. It was considered the single greatest cyber warfare achievement in modern history. "The architect of Project Chimera was a ghost," Vance continued, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. "An operative so far in the black that their real name was known to only a handful of people. We knew them only by their call sign, Nyx, the goddess of the night, because they own the darkness. They moved through the enemy's systems unseen, unheard, and left nothing but order in their wake." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to an almost personal level, yet still audible to the entire room. "Major Thorne," he said, his voice now laced with ice, "you asked this woman for coffee. You called her a dishwasher in front of your entire staff. This dishwasher is General Eva Rostova." A collective, audible gasp swept through the room. Thorne's face went from pale to sheet white, his body swaying as if he'd been physically struck. "She is not from logistics," Vance clarified, his voice rising with righteous power. "She is logistics. She is the chief architect of the entire global command network you are currently using. She wrote the foundational code for the defensive AI you so confidently deployed. The satellite network that Cerberus took down, she designed it in her spare time. And the ghost we all called Nyx, he let the name hang in the air, a name of legend and myth, has been standing on your watch floor for the last 6 hours, watching you fail, without another word." General Marcus Vance squared his shoulders, brought his heels together with a sharp crack, and rendered the crispest, most formal salute of his long and decorated career. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it is an honor to have you, General Eva Rostova." The quiet professional, the living legend, simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then, with the same deliberate calm she had displayed all day, she reached into the simple, nondescript leather bag she carried, a bag Thorne had assumed held a packed lunch. She withdrew a small, rectangular box covered in black velvet. She walked over to Major Thorne's command console, the now useless nexus of a shattered authority, and placed the box gently on its surface. With a flick of her thumb, she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, lay 4 brilliant silver stars, the rank of a full general. They glittered under the cold lights of the GTAC, each one a universe of silent, undeniable competence. The image of those 4 silver stars, gleaming against the black velvet, burned itself into the collective memory of the GTC. It became a symbol, a new North Star by which the culture of the entire command would reorient itself. The story of that day did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the secure networks and whispered corridors of the global military complex like a shockwave. It became known simply as the dishwasher incident, or more reverently, the day Nyx came for coffee. Junior analysts who had been present became minor celebrities, asked to recount every detail, every word, every subtle movement Rostova had made. They spoke of the preternatural calm in her eyes, the impossible speed of her fingers, the deafening silence that followed her victory. The security footage of the event was classified at the highest level, yet stills from it, a blurry image of Rostova at the legacy terminal, a crystal-clear shot of the 4 stars on Thorne's desk, somehow found their way into the digital ether, becoming instant memes and cautionary icons for a new generation of soldiers and intelligence officers. The phrase, "Get me a coffee," Nix became the ultimate shorthand for career-ending arrogance, a verbal warning shot fired at any officer who mistook their rank for genuine expertise. It was a story told to new recruits at Fort Meade, to cadets at West Point, to pilots in their ready rooms. It became a piece of institutional folklore, a modern myth with a powerful, simple moral. The most dangerous person in the room is the one you never see coming. Major Kalen Thorne was not court-martialed. He was not publicly disgraced. General Rostova, in a quiet word with General Vance, had requested otherwise. She understood that humiliation was a poor teacher. True change required a more profound, more personal reckoning. Thorne was, however, stripped of his command and formally reprimanded. The real transformation, though, happened within him. The man who had stood so proudly on the command floor, a monument to his own ego, was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell forced to confront the vast, empty chasm between his perceived competence and the stark reality of his failure. He spent weeks in a state of self-imposed isolation, replaying the events of that day over and over in his mind. He saw not just his own arrogance, but the silent complicity of those around him, the culture of superficial judgment he had so carefully cultivated. He understood, in a way that cut him to the bone, that he had failed not because the enemy was too good, but because he was too blind. He had judged a book by its cover, and in doing so had almost gotten the entire library burned to the ground. In an act that stunned his superiors, Thorne submitted a formal request. He did not ask for a transfer to another prestigious command or a quiet desk job to ride out his career. He requested a voluntary demotion to the rank of captain and a reassignment to the Network Architecture and Logistics Division, the very department General Rostova had founded. He wanted to learn. He wanted to start over, from the very bottom, and understand the real work, the silent, thankless, essential work that held the entire enterprise together. His request was granted. 6 months later, the man who had once commanded the GTAC could be found in a brightly lit server room, not shouting orders, but patiently tracing fiber optic cables and learning to write diagnostic script from a young sergeant who, a year prior, he wouldn't have even deigned to notice. He was quieter now. He listened more than he spoke. He treated every person, from the janitor to the colonels, with a quiet, attentive respect. He was learning the language of competence, a language spoken not with the mouth, but with the hands and the mind. Meanwhile, General Rostova remained a ghost. She did not take over the GTAC. She did not accept a public commendation. The day after the incident, she was seen not in a meeting with the Joint Chiefs, but in that same server room, kneeling on the floor beside a young airman, a woman barely out of basic training. With infinite patience, she was walking the young woman through the complex beauty of the very source code she had used to defeat Cerberus, her voice a low, steady murmur. Her legacy was not the legend she had become, but the knowledge she was so determined to pass on. The legacy terminal she had used was eventually decommissioned, but it was not scrapped. It was encased in protective glass and mounted on a wall in the main corridor of the GTAC. Beside it, a simple, unadorned brass plaque was installed. It did not bear her name or rank. It said only, the NYX terminal. Competence is quiet. A year passed. The GTAC was a profoundly different place. The frantic, ego-driven energy that had once defined it was gone, replaced by a quiet, collaborative intensity. Officers no longer shouted to be heard. They huddled in small groups around terminals, their voices low, their focus absolute. The change in culture was a direct result of the legend that now permeated the building's very walls. The story was told to every new arrival as part of their orientation, a foundational text for their service there. The person who often told it was Captain Kalen Thorne. He had earned back his rank, not through ambition, but through a year of dedicated, humble work. He had become one of the most respected officers on the base, not for his command presence, but for his empathy and his genuine desire to empower his subordinates. One crisp autumn afternoon, Thorne stood with a new lieutenant, a bright-eyed young woman fresh from intel school, in front of the glass-encased NYX terminal. We used to think power was about how loud you could shout, Thorne said, his voice soft, reflective. "We measured strength by the shine on your boots and the number of medals on your chest. We were wrong. We were children playing with matches." He pointed to the inert keyboard behind the glass. That day, a woman they called a dishwasher sat right there. She didn't have a uniform. She didn't have a title we recognized. She just had competence. Pure, absolute, silent competence. While we were making noise, she was making a difference. She reminded us that the most critical systems aren't the ones made of wires and code. They're the ones made of people. And you can't know their value just by looking at them. The young lieutenant looked at Thorne, then back at the terminal. She had heard the story, of course, but hearing it from him, the man who had been the villain of the piece, gave it a profound and lasting gravity. It wasn't just a cool story anymore. It was a lesson in humility, a guide to a better form of leadership. "What happened to her?" the lieutenant asked. "General Rostova?" Thorne allowed himself a small, sad smile. "Nobody knows for sure. A few weeks after the incident, she was gone. No farewell ceremony, no forwarding address. Some say she retired. Some say she's building the next generation of network defenses from a cabin somewhere in the mountains. I think she's still out there, watching. A quiet guardian. A reminder that the real strength, the kind that saves the world, doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a job to do." The legacy of General Rostova was not in a plaque or a story, but in the very air of the GTAC. It was in the way a senior analyst would now patiently listen to a junior technician's idea. It was in the way officers from different branches now shared data freely, their egos checked at the door. It was in the quiet, shared understanding that assumptions were a poison, and that respect was a currency earned only through demonstrated skill. She had not just averted a crisis. She had performed a cultural exorcism, casting out the demons of arrogance and prejudice and replacing them with the quiet angels of humility and collaboration. She had proven, in one silent, 90-second burst of brilliance, that true authority is not granted by a rank on a collar, but is inherent in the ability to solve an impossible problem when it matters most. The ripples of her actions continued to expand, far beyond the walls of the GTAC. The story, stripped of its classified details but retaining its powerful core, became a staple in leadership seminars across both the military and corporate worlds. It was a perfect parable for the digital age, a testament to the fact that in a world of noise, signal is everything. The quiet ones, the observers, the builders, the ones who understand the deep architecture of a system. They were the new titans. General Rostova had become a symbol for every programmer who had their ideas dismissed by a charismatic but ignorant manager, every female engineer spoken over in a meeting, every quiet expert whose wisdom was ignored in favor of a loud opinion. Her story was a validation, an inspirational touchstone that said, "Be so good they can't ignore you. Let your work be your voice. Let your results be your roar." The pulsing red that she had placed on a map had led to the swift and silent dismantling of a global cyber-terrorist organization, an operation that saved countless lives and stabilized a volatile region. It was a victory won not with bombs and bullets, but with logic and light. It was a new kind of warfare, and she was its quiet, unassuming master. Captain Thorne, for his part, became the keeper of the flame. He dedicated his renewed career to identifying and mentoring the quiet professionals under his command, the ones who didn't self-promote, the ones who let their work speak for them. He created new evaluation systems that prized tangible results over political savvy, collaboration over charisma. He was repaying a debt to the woman who had both destroyed and saved him, ensuring that the lesson he had learned so painfully would become the foundation for a stronger, smarter, and more humble generation of leaders. The final philosophical truth of that day was this: legacy isn't the story they tell about you when you're gone. It's the change in behavior you inspire while you're still here. It's the culture that grows in the space you cleared. General Eva Rostova's legacy was not the 4 silver stars she left on a desk. It was the thousands of quiet acts of competence and mutual respect that now happened every single day in the place she had saved. True power doesn't need to announce its arrival. It is felt in the sudden, calm clarity that follows its intervention, in the righting of a ship that was moments from capsizing. It is the quiet professional who, without a word, steps out of the shadows and simply, elegantly, and decisively does the work. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.